Hi, welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. It's Monday edition of Focal Point. Glad to have you in the conversation. Jeff, let's grab soundbite A6. You know, we've talked here about Common Core, and I mentioned in my column today that education is one of the things that's not on the list in Article 1, Section 8. So the federal government has simply no authority to direct the educational process from Washington, D.C. None, zip, zero, nada. It's got no authority to collect taxes for that purpose. It has no authority to distribute revenues for that purpose. None. So everything it does in the area of education, every single solitary thing that the federal government does in the area of education is flatly illegal. It is flatly, unmistakably, unquestionably unconstitutional. But I want to give you a flavor for what we're up against. Here's a panel discussion. This is a guy from Harvard University talking about Common Core. And, you know, we got a lot of reasons to object to Common Core. I think the standards are absolutely terrible. They're horrible. They're political indoctrination, brainwashing of the worst sort. Remember, I gave you that example about studying Frankenstein under Common Core curriculum. It turns out to be an opportunity to provide an opportunity. They don't even read Frankenstein. They just read what people said about Frankenstein, about the book. And then the teacher uses it as a way to point the finger of blame at right-wing groups. They're all fascist groups. I mean, that's the takeaway that the teacher's notes instruct teachers to give to their students in reading the book by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. So just an evidence of just how biased and twisted and just flat out abjectly wrong those standards are. But to me, the worst thing is that it's coming from the federal government, that the federal government is directing this, providing funds for this, setting standards for this, and all that kind of thing. But here is Paul Reville, R-E-V-I-L-L-E, Paul Reville. He's the former Secretary of Education for Massachusetts, big-time Common Core supporter. And I want you to listen to how he thinks of your kids and mine. Let's listen.
Again, the argument about where it came from, I think, privileges certain sort of fringe voices about federalism and states' rights and things of that nature, when really what we're doing at the national level here now, state by state, is what a lot of our states thought made sense individually. Why should some towns or cities in states have no standards or low standards and others have extremely high standards when the children belong to all of us and would move? And the same logic applies to the nation.
All right, so listen to that. The children belong to all of us, and the same logic applies to the nation. So in other words, he's saying, look, the reason we ought to impose this one-size-fits-all standard on everybody is that the children of America do not belong to their parents. They belong to us. We don't want to let local communities decide what their educational standards ought to be because they might make a bad choice. So we have to arrogate to ourselves the power to tell every tiny little community in America what their education standards ought to be, even if they're absolutely horrible, terrible, very bad, no good. So that's that's the thinking we're up against, ladies and gentlemen, with liberals. They honestly believe that their children, remember Melissa Harris Perry basically said, we got to get past this antiquated notion that children belong to their parents. All right, so that is what's coming out of D.C. on Common Core. And if you ever needed a reason to oppose Common Core, that's the only one you need right there. Well, you got two of them. It's unconstitutional, number one. And number two, the mentality behind it is your kids don't belong to you. They belong to the state. And that goes all the way back to Plato. That's not something that's new. I mean, Plato believed that parents, or Socrates, well, no, Plato was actually in the Republic. He believed that that parents are basically breeders. That the reason we need moms and dads is we got to have somebody to conceive children and bring them into the world. And then once they're conceived and delivered, we give them over to the state, and the state takes them from there and turns them into philosopher kings. Number to call if you want to join the conversation today, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. Talking about the role that I believe governors can play in bringing us back to freedom. Talking about the abridgment of the free exercise of religion, Constitution being turned on its head. Talking about this concept in education that children belong to the state, not to the parents. Want to know what you think about that, taking away local control over what happens educationally. So 888-589-8840 is the number to call, 888-589-8840. Now, last night, you're aware, Bill O'Reilly, this clip 1 and 2 and 3, if we can get to him, Rob. Last night, Bill O'Reilly interviewed Barack Obama in connection with the Super Bowl broadcast. And overall, I think he did a pretty good job. I think Bill O'Reilly did a pretty good job. The striking thing to me is Bill O'Reilly was asking them questions that the media should have been asking. If we had a responsible media that was doing its job, these questions would have been asked to President Obama months ago. And he would have been probed and he would have been pressed on this, and instead nobody's asked him. So when Bill O'Reilly asked him these questions, Barack Obama doesn't know how to handle it. He gets flustered, he stumbles, he fumbles around. They wind up talking over each other because it becomes clear to Bill O'Reilly he's got no interest in actually answering his questions. He's obfuscating, he's avoiding, he's bobbing and weaving and dodging, if not outright lying. Now here's the first question, and had to do with what happened in Libya. And as you are aware, right away, administration officials, almost immediately, knew that this was a terrorist attack. They knew that this was not a demonstration gone wrong. This wasn't some kind of movie review. Wasn't a bunch of people hopped up over a bad internet movie. It had nothing to do with that whatsoever. This was a coordinated Al-Qaeda-led attack. We know now, led by somebody who was released from Guantanamo Bay by George Bush. That one's on George Bush. Barack Obama didn't release that guy. George Bush did. And he led the attack on, and 4 Americans are dead as a result of that. So that's the facts. We know that. We know the movie had nothing to do with it. So Bill O'Reilly now begins to bore in on Barack Obama about the line that the administration took. Let's listen.
Libya, a House Armed Services testimony. General Carter Ham, you know the general, yes, Security in Africa. Yeah. He testified that on the day that the ambassador was murdered and the 3 other Americans, all right, he told Secretary Panetta it was a terrorist attack. Mm-hmm. Shortly after General Ham said that, Secretary Panetta came in to you. Yeah. Did he tell you, Secretary Panetta, it was a terrorist attack?
You know what he told me was that there was an attack on our compound.
He didn't use the word terror?
You know, in the heat of the moment, Bill, what folks are focused on is what's happening on the ground. Do we have eyes on it? How can we make sure our folks are secure?
I just want to get this on the record. Did he tell you it was a terror attack?
Bill, and what I'm answering your question. What he said to me was, we've got an attack on our compound. We don't know yet. We don't know yet who's doing it. Understand, by definition, Bill, when somebody is attacking our compound, that's an act of terror, which is how I characterized it the day after it happened. So the question ends up being who, in fact, was attacking us.
But it's more than that, though, because of Susan Rice.
No.
It's more than that, because Susan Rice goes out and tells the world that it was a spontaneous demonstration off a videotape, but your commanders and the Secretary of Defense know it's a terror attack. Just as an American, I'm just confused.
I'm just confused. You know, and Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton made an ad for Pakistani television. It was all about a movie. We had nothing to do with the movie. We're embarrassed by the movie. That movie doesn't represent the best of America. It had nothing to do with the movie, and they knew it when they made that ad. Barack Obama went to the UN 2 weeks later and blamed it on the movie. He knew it was a terrorist attack, had nothing to do with the movie. You know, and you realize he never did answer Bill O'Reilly's question. Did General Carter Ham tell you that this was a terrorist attack? He did not answer the question. Now, here is clip number 2 dealing with the whole IRS business, and we know that the IRS intimidated people, that they abused their authority. We know this went to the upper levels in the Obama administration. The general counsel of the IRS was behind this. All of these these Tea Party requests for 501c3 status, we know now that they got routed to Washington, D.C., to the office of the general counsel of the IRS, who met 157 times in the White House. We know these weren't renegade rogue IRS agents in the Cincinnati office just going off reservation on this deal. This was coming from the top levels of the IRS. And they were harassing those that were opposing Barack Obama and his policy. So Bill O'Reilly bores in on President Obama about these IRS abuses.
Douglas Shulman, former IRS chief, he was cleared into the White House 157 times, more than any of your cabinet members, more than any other IRS guy in the history by far. Okay, why was Douglas Shulman here 157 times? Why?
Mr. Shulman, as the head of the IRS, is constantly coming in because at the time we were trying to set up the healthcare.gov. And the
what
IRS,
did he have to do with that?
The IRS is involved in making sure that that works as part of the overall healthcare team.
So it was all healthcare?
Number two, we've also got the IRS involved when it comes to some of the financial reforms to make sure that we don't have taxpayer-funded bailouts in the future. So you had all these different agendas in which the head of the IRS is naturally involved.
Did you speak to him a lot yourself?
I do not recall meeting with him in any of these meetings that are pretty routine meetings.
Okay, so you don't recall seeing Shulman, because what some people are saying is that the IRS was used at a local level in Cincinnati, maybe other places, to go after.
Absolutely wrong.
But how do you know that? Because we still don't know what happened there.
Bill, we do. That's not what happened. Folks have, again, had multiple hearings on this. I mean, these kinds of things keep on surfacing, in part because you and your TV station will promote them.
But
when
don't
folks
you feel
actually,
there are unanswered questions?
Bill, when you actually look at the stuff, there have been multiple hearings on it. What happened here is that you've got a 501c4 law that people think is confusing. No, that the folks did not know how to implement. Okay. Because it basically says,
so you're saying
if you're involved,
no corruption there at all? No.
That's not what I'm saying. That's actually...
No, but I want to know what you're saying. You're the leader of the country.
Absolutely.
You're saying no corruption?
No.
None?
No. There were some boneheaded decisions out of a
but
local
no mass
office.
corruption?
Not even mass corruption, not even a smidgen of corruption.
Okay.
So there's Barack Obama trying to blame it on those rogue agents in Cincinnati again, boneheaded decisions, and he was going to go on and talk about Cincinnati. And then he says not a smidgen of corruption. That is my candidate for the lie of the year. If there was not a smidgen of corruption, Mr. President, then why did Lois Lerner take the fifth when she gave testimony before Congress? You take the fifth, and what you say is, I'm not going to answer on the grounds that my answer might intend what? To incriminate me. Well, if there's no smidgen of corruption, why would you be worried about incriminating yourself if you tell the truth? You know, and that's just the beginning of it. You've got innocent people that were intimidated by the threat of audits, fines, civil lawsuits, criminal prosecution, prohibitive legal fees. And President Obama has the audacity to say there's not a smidgen of corruption in all of that. Focal Point, AFR Talk, back in 2.